everyone, and welcome back to the Business of Business podcast, Two Daughters and Their Dad. And I'm your host, Staci J Dempsey. And like always, thankfully, I have one of the other daughters and the one and only dad. And good morning and good afternoon to the both of you and to all of our listeners and viewers and to everyone who's checking us out on live stream. Hello, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good afternoon.
Here we go. Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are in the world, wherever you are tuning in. Thank you guys so much for joining us. So today we want to talk a little bit about risk versus reward. What maybe is a risk that you have taken in your business that has had the biggest reward? And I know that Dad and Jennifer both have some great stories, great examples to share with everyone. But we also want to talk about maybe a risk doesn't necessarily have to be this huge, major shift in your business. It could just simply be, we're doing okay. And now I'm kind of nervous to maybe make a little bit of a change or take a little bit of a risk because, you know what, coasting, doesn't feel so bad right now. It's kind of what we've been working towards. So let's start this, let's start this conversation off. Jennifer, why don't you share with our listeners a little bit about why you are feeling this topic, and certainly share with us maybe a story or an experience that you have in taking a risk in your business.
I mean, typically I'm feeling every topic we talk about, but
you really are. Shout out
I
to you
know.
for coming up with all the topics. Jennifer is the nugget that provides most of the Nugget Alerts. Dad and I will get on our game here.
I talk for a living. Here we go. So, funny, when I started thinking about this topic, we were talking about if you're an entrepreneur, then you probably have already made a risk once or twice as you started your business. And so when I was thinking back to when I opened my business almost 9 years ago, the risk was I would do anything to make it happen. And so it didn't matter money wise, how much time it took, how much energy it took. None of that. I would have signed a crazy contract if it wasn't for Dad. So it didn't matter what it was. I was going to sign it and I was going to do it, and nobody could tell me any differently. Now, a few years into the business, I'm faced with another huge risk to take, and I was hesitant. I was excited. I could see it, but I was hesitant because things were okay. And so as I've learned more about what it is to take risks, I started to think about how not all risks have to be these major things inside of your business. We can take small risks every single day inside of our business in one way or another. And I think how we gain confidence around risk taking in our business is just doing that. Sometimes you have to kind of force yourself into that next phase, feeling uncomfortable, trying something new, because after you take that risk comes either maybe it didn't work out the way that you thought it was going to, so there comes a lesson, experience, or you get 100% fulfillment. And I think most of the time when you reach that fulfillment point after taking a risk, that becomes kind of addicting to entrepreneurs. Like, okay, I want to do it again because we made it to the fulfillment. We reached the vision of what the risk was. And so we could talk about different risks inside of your business. It could be hiring more employees, hiring a manager. It could be raising your prices inside of your business. It could be maybe you as the boss taking a step back and not being inside of your business as much and delegating. Or it could be completely changing every single thing about your business for what you believe is for the better, even if it goes against industry standards. So check, and check. I've done them all. And I lost some sleep, but we're still here, guys. So we are still making it happen, even with all the risks that have been taken. So what about you, Dad? What are your thoughts about risk taking as an entrepreneur?
Well, first of all, it's essential, and we know that everybody that's interested in this podcast or because they're looking to become an entrepreneur or already entrepreneurs, are dealing with risk. They either already went down that road by starting a business, or they're thinking about it, and maybe the risk of it is whacking them around. Because I think the biggest thing with risk, for example, is you have to understand it. So if you're going into a business and you're thinking, okay, what's the risk? Uh, well, I don't believe the risk should be that you could lose it all. I mean, that you could, you know, lose everything that you've worked for. I think that you have to go into it with the idea that here is what I'm willing to risk, but I'm not looking to lose it all. Um, you know, I'm not looking to lose my home and go, those kind of things. Um, Now, when it comes to risk reward, it's obviously the big risk versus, it creates the big reward. That's the law. The bigger the risk, the bigger the reward. But you should be careful with, again, not be willing to lose everything in the process. Um, but when it comes to, you're already started, and I mean, in my case, my biggest risk was, you know, 30, 35 years ago, 36 years ago, trekking from West Virginia to New Jersey, to go into do insurance. And I'm bringing, you know, two small kids and a wife that's pregnant with twins to an area that we don't know anybody, and we're starting basically, a business that we know the business, just don't know the area, don't have people. And so it was a big risk. It was leaving your comfort zone, knowing that there was more opportunity there. And so I always look back on that as that was a big undertaking, a big risk. It was scary. But here I am 35 years later, and the business is going well, very well. One, two of those, three of those kids that are in the business, and so that's been a big reward, but that was a big risk going back to the beginning. But along the way, then it was making a lot of decisions around continuing. How do you grow a business? And so I like what Staci started with. Is a lot of those risk decisions are not these monumental decisions. They're those daily decisions of where to invest, where to spend money to continue to grow your business. That could be where's the best place to uh, spend money on your marketing program, where's the best money to in staffing and how to establish compensation. All those things have an element of risk to it. There's a level of being nervous about it. And Jen, I know you've experienced that the more you do it, the more you get comfortable with it. But it's still very, very challenging. Now, lately, if I would say what's the risk that we're looking at, is more just around managing change. Just a lot of things coming at us that, external things that's forcing us to look at what we do differently. And that can be uncomfortable. We like, as it was said, we like to be in our comfort zone. We like things going a certain way. We get accustomed to it, and then when all of a sudden something from the outside throws throws a monkey wrench into that, then we've got to make adjustments, and that can be that could be maybe not monetary adjustments, but we got learning curve. We got to do things differently. We've got to embrace new technology. We've got to figure out how to bring staff and people along with us, that have to utilize all of that. And so again, it's all it's all about that generating that kind of that uneasiness inside of us. But we have to do it, in order to stay relevant and continue to grow our business. So I think, again, don't bet the farm when it comes to risk, but don't be afraid of it either, and embrace it and own it. And the more you do, the more you're going to get comfortable, working, with those risks and taking risks.
Well, isn't it funny, Stacy saying don't bet the farm, but it sounds like Dad bet the farm leaving West Virginia. I think in those big moments, that big risk, it's almost like you have this mindset of like, this can't fail, right? Like I have to make this happen because otherwise, Dad, what was the backup plan? We were just going to truck back to West Virginia or?
Well, I mean, again, I guess when I'm saying that is, financially, I didn't bet the farm. I mean, it wasn't like, yes, I mean, I picked up and moved out of my comfort zone, but I didn't come up here and you know, get a loan for $1 million to start my business, or I I would have never gotten a loan for $1 million. I wouldn't have gotten a loan for 10,000 at that point. But it wasn't. I didn't make that kind of financial because in my mind, I thought, well, the worst case is, yeah, you pack up and you head back, and or I was young, I just go get a job. I get a job somewhere, to keep things going because I wasn't diving into some kind of huge financial obligation.
Yeah.
But you're right in the mindset of, I didn't look at it as having a plan B. I looked at it as this is my plan, and there's a plan A and there is no plan B, so you have to make it work. And so, so it was working, and working a lot, and
Yeah.
of course, and then you have little kids, and it was a lot. It was a lot to tackle, no doubt. So
It's funny. I was thinking about back when I first started the salon. You guys got to remember, I would basically call Dad at least once a week. You remember that, Dad? Because I was just a hairdresser figuring it out, right? And I'll never forget, I was thinking about bringing in this high end product line into my salon. And so we were talking about retail shampoo and conditioner anywhere from $30 to $60. And so the investment I want to say was probably about $7,000 to bring this product line in, right? So I called Dad, of course, because I'm like, I want to do it. I'm scared. And so I'm telling him, the pros, the cons. And I'll always remember you said to me, Dad, well, what's the worst thing that can happen? And can you take a $7,000 hit? Will the business still open the next day? And if you believe in the product, then I think you should go for it. And so I tell you that story because I also think, especially early on, when you're not, again, I had very low confidence in myself to make big decisions. And at that was a big decision for me. And so it's helpful to have someone, I mean, you can't have my dad, but someone like him, to be able to call and say, hey, here's what I'm looking to do. It's outside of my comfort zone. It's a lot of money. And what do you think? And be able to have someone to say, yeah, I think you should go for it. Or, let's think about this a little bit more. Let's walk through, what can happen after this decision is made. So that has always stuck with me to this day. So now, thankfully, I don't call my dad anymore every single week, but I use that to say, all right, I'm thinking about making this move, making this decision. Now, what is the worst thing that can happen? Will the business survive? Absolutely. X, Y, and Z, and then move forward. So that's kind of my risk-taking process that Dad taught me early on. Now, I will share that I want to say it's been one full year since I've made the second biggest risk inside of my business. And, I did call Dad about this one because it was pretty big. And I was kind of doing my pitch to him like, listen, I'm going to go completely against the grain. I think when you're in an industry for such a long time, people just start telling you what the norm is. And for me, being in business for a while, being a hairdresser for a while, some things just didn't make sense for me anymore. And I started to discover over time what I liked about, my business and what I didn't like about my business. And I started asking the question of how can I change in a positive way? Because your business should work for you. Um, there's no doubt that early on, you make a lot of sacrifices, but the reward to opening a business is that it should start working for you. And so I felt like I hit a wall. So I decided to hire a coach and completely change everything about not only my business, but what the industry standard was. And so I was very nervous, and kind of went through that. All right, what's the worst thing that can happen? And I just kept saying to myself, if this doesn't work, I'm going to give it 1 year. If this doesn't work, I'll just go back to how I used to do business, right? I can slowly change back. And there's no doubt that within that first year, there was challenges, there were struggles, there was things that I had to work through and, again, continue to explain and put my vision out there of how I wanted things to be and how I thought the beauty industry is moving in a positive way. And it's funny because I just wrote a blog about this of 1 year that we're starting to feel that fulfillment, that reward. I can, last week actually, I took a whole week off and nobody called me from my business. Nobody asked me for anything. The business still opened and closed every day. You know, it it has been to that place of reward. So that's not to say it wasn't scary. That's not to say that, I was afraid that it could blow up in my face. But I think, you take the risk and you just have to see it through and follow it through and continue to make those changes inside of your business, to get to the place that you want to be, right? If we want to grow our business, then we have to start walking through, those changes that scare the crap out of us, but we can get to that other side, of fulfillment.
Well, you
And I
make
think
a
it's also important to note that reward doesn't necessarily equal money. That it
Yeah.
can be the peace of mind of knowing that, you know what, my business opened, nobody called me, everyone was, everybody's trained, they were able to problem solve, you know, uh, everything was able to run without me there. And, that's a reward. If you're
Yeah.
investing in technology that, you know what, everybody's trained, everybody feels comfortable, or you're maximizing the technology that you spent time, and it's maybe producing a way for referrals to easily come in, or rounding out accounts, or getting new business in some way, shape, or form. It's like that is a reward. It doesn't necessarily mean that you are taking home more money or able to spend more money on lifestyle, but it can mean a plethora of other things. Go ahead, Dad. You were getting ready to say something.
yeah, no, it's good. And I think the two key points, I mean, that's a critically good question to ask yourself when it comes to risk is always what is the worst that can happen, if this fails. And so again, I go back to if it means I could lose everything, you might want to really think through that. But if it means that, yeah, it'll set me back, but my doors will still open, still, I can still make payroll, and then, go from there. The other thing, is having, people around you, whether it's, we've talked about the business coach, the mentor, um, someone that has that experience and run, those risk ideas by people and get input, from others. I mean, it's always good to get that input. And, because again, they might see things, that will help you make that decision to do it, or they might see things that really say, okay, probably not the best thing to do right now. but getting other people involved. And I will say, and we've talked about this before and probably more than once. And I would encourage everybody, if this is the first time you've heard it, and maybe we can attach something with this podcast on the sigmoid curve, because again, that's a great example or illustration of what risk really looks like. And basically, the sigmoid curve is when you start something that's got a risk, there's usually going to be an initial dip. Because you've got learning curve, you got financial investment, you got time. So there's going to be a dip, and then all of a sudden, things start to the trajectory of that business, we'll call it, is starting to move upward. And you're starting to have good cash flow and consistency and other things. Well, then the key to risk then is, when do you start to curve over again? When do you make that next investment? And that's really is critical, because a lot of entrepreneurs will not want to do that. It's finally, oh, geez, I started this business. I had this downturn. We struggled. I really asked my family to sacrifice, financial things, and now we're starting to do well. I need, I want to start spending money. I want to start, need new cars, or you want to start, enjoying the fruit of your labor, and nothing wrong with that. But if it doesn't allow you to make that next investment in your business, take that next risk as your business, the curve is going upward, then that's where you can become, kind of in a dangerous place. Because if you don't make that, and then all of a sudden change happens, or you wait too long, your business starts to plateau. And then it can actually start to go over. The curve comes over on itself, and you start seeing your business go down. And then it's very difficult to make those adjustments and take that risk, because now you're seeing a business downturn. So always trying to, take that next risk when things are going up, things are moving, growing. It's hard, but that's successful businesses, really get an understanding of when to do that on the upside of that curve, not trying to figure it out when it's already turned on itself. So sigmoid curve, we've talked about it, but I would encourage everybody to take a look at that and look that up and do some research on that.
Yeah, that's great. That's definitely a good way to also probably just wrap up this podcast, and maybe encourage our listeners and our viewers to Google that. Also check our description box of this podcast for any Nugget Alerts, and for other ways that they can connect with us. And we want to thank you guys so very much for tuning in and being with us today. And we will see you guys in our next episode. Bye bye.